Spectro Rover was pretty bad at the start of Wuthering Waves, but ever since the release of the 2.0, she's gotten quite a big buff to her kit, that being Spectro Frazzle, which actually makes her a pretty good unit. So, today, I will explain how to build and play Spectro Rover.
Moment of resonance.
Spectro Rover can be a sub DPS, main DPS and a support. And, as the name implies, she uses Spectro as her element whilst wielding a sword. A quick disclaimer, if your rover doesn't have Spectro Frazzle yet, that's because she will need to reach the end of the Black Shores quest line. Also, I am a bit sick, so I might sound a little bit different today. Since her kit revolves around Spectro Frazzle, let's look at how you can apply it. There are two ways to apply Spectro Frazzle. The first is by hitting an enemy with your resonance skill if you have at least 1 bar of Forte. This will apply 2 Frazzle stacks. And the second is by hitting an enemy with your Resonance Liberation. This will apply 6 stacks. Now, let's go over the rest of her kit. Her intro skill deals pretty insignificant damage, but it does grant Rover 1 Forte bar. Her basic attacks deal decent damage, but don't generate a lot of Forte points. However, if you use her charge attack, you can basic attack twice after it, which will grant Rover 1 Forte bar. Also, if you use your third basic attack, you can do a charge attack and then 1 basic attack and you will also gain 1 Forte bar. Her resonance skill deals a bit of damage, but you don't need to level this at all, since you will always be using her Forte circuit for your resonance skill. Once you have at least 1 Forte bar, you can use Rover's Forte circuit. Rover's Forte circuit gives her an enhanced version of her resonance skill, which you can instantly follow up by 2 enhanced basic attacks. Make sure you use these basic attacks right after her enhanced skill, because if you use a dash, jump, liberation or utility tool, these basic attacks will no longer be available. All of these attacks deal increased damage with the scaling behind her Forte circuit. This enhanced resonance skill also applies 2 Frazzle stacks and the Shimmer effect. The Shimmer effect lasts on the enemy for 9 seconds. Shimmer prevents the Spectro Frazzle stacks to reduce over time, making the enemy take a full amount of damage applied from your Frazzle for an extended period of time. All of the damage of her Forte circuit is also counted as resonance skill damage. Now for her Resonance Liberation.
Moment of resonance.
Echoing Orchestra. This is a 2-hit nuke that applies 6 Frazzle stacks. Whilst using your Liberation, time slows down before quickly going back to standard speed after the second hit hits. Now for Rover's auto skill. Her auto skill doesn't deal any damage and it doesn't give any buffs. Instead, it slows down time around the incoming character for 3 seconds. And finally, her inherent skills. The first will increase the damage dealt by her enhanced basic attacks by 60%, making them deal quite a lot of damage. And the second will increase Rover's attack by 15% for 5 seconds after casting her heavy attack. And since Rover gains 1 Forte bar from her heavy attack, this is actually quite nice since she will use it quite a lot. For her leveling recommendations, I recommend to level your Forte circuit and Liberation first. These two have the utmost priority, since your Liberation is a big nuke, whilst you use your Forte circuits a lot of times whilst also dealing a lot of damage. After that, you can level your basic attacks if you want to run her as a main DPS, but for sub DPS, I recommend that you only level your Forte and Liberation. And finally, her intro skill and resonance skill. Both of these deal insignificant damage and your resonance skill will never even be used. So I recommend keeping these two on level 1, even if you're running her as a main DPS.
Hopefully this helps.
Spectro Rover can use quite a bit of weapons. First, let's look at the standard 5-star sword, the Emerald of Genesis. It has high base attack and a good amount of crit rate. And the passive also isn't too bad. First, it increases the energy recharge of Rover by 12.8%. And for the actual effect, it grants 6% attack for 10 seconds when you use a resonance skill, which has a maximum of 2 stacks. And since Rover's skill cooldown is only 6 seconds, she can make full use of this passive. Next up, we have the Blazing Brilliance, Chun-Li's signature weapon. Right now, this is the best weapon for Spectro Rover, since it has high base attack, a good amount of crit damage, and up to 56% resonance skill damage, making it the perfect weapon for her. For the 4-star weapons, I recommend the craftable Rinascita weapon, the Fables of Wisdom. For a 4-star weapon, it has high base attack, whilst having a bit of attack percent as a substat. However, its passive grants quite a bit more attack percent. Since every time you deal damage to an enemy with a negative status on them, which is in our case Spectro Rover, you gain 4 to 8% attack based on confinement for 10 seconds with a maximum of 4 stacks. So, in total, this weapon actually gives a maximum of 50% attack. And since this is a craftable weapon, I recommend this as the only 4-star weapon, since it's so good and so accessible. However, if you're not in Arena Sida yet, you can use any of these weapons.
I sense your weakness.
Spectro Rover can use 3 different echo sets, with the last one being a more niche option for certain teams. The first set will be the Eternal Radiance set. This can be used on both sub DPS and main DPS, but it's more recommended to use on the main DPS Spectro Rover. For the 2-piece, it increases 10% Spectro damage, whilst the 5-piece increases her crit rate by 20% after inflicting an enemy with Spectro Rover on them for 15 seconds. And it will also increase her Spectro damage by 15% if she attacks an enemy with 10 Frazzle stacks. As for the active echo, you want to use the Nightmare Morning Aches. This echo grants 12% Spectro damage bonus just by having it equipped in your main slot. And its active deals 273.60% damage, but if the enemy has Frazzle on them, this damage gets increased by 100%. The second set will be the Wounded Cloud set. This set is recommended for sub DPS Rover. This set's 2-piece grants 10% energy recharge, whilst the 5-piece increases the incoming Resonator's attack by 22.5% for 15 seconds. This set is almost always good on a sub DPS, although she will lose some damage. But she will also increase the damage of the incoming Resonator. For the active echo, you want to use the Impermanence Heron, since the active effect increases the incoming Resonator's damage by 12%. And the third set you could run on Rover will be the Rejuvenating Glow set. You can use the Rover as a healer, since her S4 heals the entire team by 20% of Rover's attack when using her Liberation. This is mainly used in Phoebe teams, but it is usable in any team, since the 5-piece increases attack of all party members by 15% for 30 seconds. For the active echo, you want to use the Fallacy of No Return, since it grants some energy recharge to Rover and 10% attack to the entire team. For Rover, you want to run the standard 4-3-3-1-1 with these main stats. As for the substats, you want to use these stats with priority from top to bottom. But if you remember that if you use the Eternal Radiance Echo set, it'll give 20% crit rate, as well as her S1 which gives 15% crit rate. So make sure you never go above 65% crit rate. And if you're using Shorekeeper, the maximum should be 52.5%. Besides this, you should also keep in mind that her S3 increases energy regeneration by 20%. Rover's Liberation has a low 125 energy requirement, so getting 30% energy recharge in total should be more than enough to cast her Liberation every rotation.
Strike from the shadows.
Since Rover is so flexible, she can be used in almost any team. But the one that will be the best right now is the Rover and Phoebe team. You can run this team either as main DPS Rover, sub DPS Phoebe for your standard DPS Rover team, main DPS Rover and main DPS Phoebe for your dual DPS team, sub DPS Rover and main DPS Phoebe, since Phoebe needs a lot of Spectral Frazzle stacks on the enemy, whilst Rover can also deal quite a lot of damage. And finally, Healer Rover and main DPS Phoebe. For if you want to use a dedicated sub DPS that buffs Phoebe even more, like Mordefi for example. If you want Rover as a main DPS and you don't have Phoebe, you can also use Shusha. Shusha increases skill damage whilst also dealing damage herself. And besides this, the Empyrean Anthem increases Rover's attack by 20% for 4 seconds after her coordinated attacks crit. And now, for a unit I almost never recommend. It's Tauchi. Tauchi is not that bad. When you're using a decent rotation, Tauchi doesn't have that much field time. I do recommend using Verena though, since she has very fast Concerto energy. For the rotation, the first one will be a bit slower, but after that, you can swap from Rover to Tauchi, which will do her 3 enhanced basic attacks, after which you will swap to Verena to do Verena's rotation. After which, you swap back to Tauchi to do her 3 basic attacks, followed by her skill and Liberation. After which, you should be able to swap to Rover, or you should do 1 or 2 more basic attacks, if you're not using a concerto buffing weapon. And finally, if you're new to the game or free to play, you could also use Sanhua or Yang Yang. They both give about the same amount of useful buffs to Rover, whilst having a really short field time. Personally, I use this team to clear the Tower of Adversity middle tower.
The hour is upon us.
Since Rover is free, you will get all the sequences. So, here's a little graph to see what they do and how good they are.
No hesitation. Hopefully.
At first, I liked Spectro Rover, but she just could not find a place in any of my teams. But after the 2.0 update, that all changed. Because of the spectral frazzle she applies, she actually has become quite a good resonator, making her a great option for a lot of teams. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, may I recommend the video on the screen right now. I appreciate you all. Bye bye.